In 51 days, the Mariners will kick off the 2019 season in Tokyo against the Oakland Athletics. And in 2 weeks, Mariners pitchers and catchers will report for workouts with the team. It seemed like a great time to talk about how former Attorney General and U.S. Senator Slade Gorton helped keep Major League Baseball in Seattle 2 different times. Slade Gorton was the Attorney General of Washington State from 1969 to 1981. He then went on to serve as the U.S. Senator from Washington for 3 terms. During his tenure, the AGO doubled in size from 400 to 800 attorneys and staff, and the agency took on a number of issues from consumer protection to protecting the environment. Many folks already know that sports are very important to Senator Gorton. For example, Senator Gorton started the annual tradition of beating the governor's office at softball. But Senator Gorton also played a key role in keeping Major League Baseball in Seattle twice. In the 1970s, Attorney General Gorton sued the American League of Major League Baseball when the Seattle Pilots left for Milwaukee. And in 1992, Senator Gorton helped negotiate a deal with Nintendo to purchase the Mariners and keep them in Seattle. These are the 2 stories we're going to cover today. 1969 was the only season for the Seattle Pilots, and there were problems on multiple fronts. First, they were a bad baseball team. They finished last in the American League West with a record of 64 wins and 98 losses. They won their first 2 games at home in Sick's Stadium against the White Sox, but never had a winning record in any month. The team also had financial problems. The team's owners, Dewey and Max Soriano, couldn't afford to pay for a team outright, so they sold huge stakes to other owners and took on debt to keep the team afloat. They were 20th out of 24 teams in attendance, and Sick's Stadium was old, run down, and tiny, but the ticket prices were some of the highest in the major leagues. The stadium simply wasn't ready for a Major League Baseball team. The voters of King County approved a bond for a domed stadium in 1968, which you can see in this artist's interpretation of the Pilots' scorebook. The city of Seattle allocated almost $2 million to renovate Sick's Stadium in the interim. Baseball wasn't even supposed to be played in Seattle until 1971, but pressure from the league caused the Pilots to start their inaugural season 2 years early. The Pilots lost millions of dollars in their inaugural season. Before the season ended, Joe Cronin, the president of the American League, was insinuating the team would have to move to a new city. The Pilots owners made a handshake agreement to sell the team during Game 1 of the 1969 World Series. The 1970 season hung in the balance. Bud Selig offered to buy the team and move it to Milwaukee. The Sorianos agreed to sell the team. As the negotiations between the league, the team, and local politicians dragged on, the consortium that owned the Pilots declared bankruptcy. The players waited to be told where they would be moving a month before the season. The team equipment sat in trucks in Utah, the drivers waiting to be told whether to drive to Seattle or to Milwaukee. Several potential buyers tried to purchase the Pilots to keep them in Seattle. In this photo, alongside King County Executive John Spellman, Governor Dan Evans, and Attorney General Slade Gorton, are Eddie Carlson and Fred Dans, who attempted to buy the Pilots, but their offer was rejected. In total, multiple offers from at least 3 different investment groups were rejected, and the team prepared to leave for Milwaukee. Ultimately, the city of Seattle, King County, and the state of Washington filed suits against the American League for breach of contract. The city owned Sick's Stadium and had paid to renovate it for the Pilots. The county was going to build a domed stadium for the Pilots after the 1968 bond passed, and the state was going to lose significant tax revenue. William Dwyer was hired by A.G. Gorton to argue on behalf of the state. He was a highly respected trial lawyer and antitrust expert. In 1989, he would be appointed to the federal district court with the backing of Senator Gorton, despite being members of opposing political parties. They also had a previous relationship. Gorton had testified on behalf of Dwyer's clients, John and Sally Goldmark, in their successful libel suit in 1963. A federal bankruptcy judge dealt a blow to the suit when he ordered the sale of the Pilots to the Milwaukee Group. Focus shifted to winning damages, not keeping the Pilots in Seattle. Dwyer's brilliant legal strategy of intertwining the federal and state claims forced the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals to rule that the King County Superior Court would hear the whole case, both state and federal claims. In essence, the Circuit Court ruled that only the state courts had jurisdiction because of the restrictions on federal courts created by the Sherman Antitrust Act. The trial began in 1976, and Dwyer scored numerous points in the courtroom. Bud Selig admitted on the stand that the American League had begun negotiations to move the pilots before the season even ended. Behind the scenes, the American League, the city, the county, and the state were negotiating to end the trial. As the prospects for the American League worsened in the courtroom, the league eventually agreed to grant Seattle an expansion franchise in 1977. And now I'll play a clip from our oral history interview with Slade Gorton where he talks about the trial.
Right. Again, the way I put it, after Dwyer got done with them, the American League lawyers knew that the jury was going to vote capital punishment.
Well, you mentioned, I think it was the owner of the Oakland A's came up and testified, and came across, I think, as you said. Well, you tell the story from there.
He was so arrogant and so smirky. He proceeded with every comment to dig his grave a little bit deeper. And Bill just led him on, and Bill, as you remember if you knew him, was a sort of an aw-shucks, low-key guy who was just about the sharpest trial lawyer around.
Yes.
And so, ultimately, the American League, agreed to an expansion, which they had always turned down before.
That team became the Seattle Mariners, this time with much firmer financial footing. They played in the newly built Kingdome, which was also home to the Seattle Seahawks, who joined the NFL in 1974. Their first game in Seattle was against the California Angels on April 6, 1977, which they lost 7-0. The 1977 season did not go well. The Mariners won 64 games and lost 98, achieving the exact same record as the 1969 Pilots. Thankfully, the Mariners have gone on to win 14 World Series and become the winningest franchise in American sports. That's a joke, of course, but their value to the city and to the region transcends their record on the field, which is why they are so important to the people of Seattle. Throughout the 1980s, the Mariners struggled and never had a winning season. Jeff Smulyan purchased the team in 1989 and then began entertaining ideas of once again moving Seattle's baseball team to a new city. Despite the debut of future Hall of Famer Ken Griffey Jr. in 1989 and the Mariners' first ever winning season in 1991, the combination of a low-achieving team and the small media market kept the Mariners from being as profitable as Smulyan wanted. In 1991, Smulyan announced the team was for sale. The initial fear was that he would sell the team to investors who would relocate the Mariners to Tampa Bay, Florida. Local investors were given 120 days to come up with a plan to keep the Mariners in Seattle. The asking price for the franchise was set at $100 million. Senator Gorton had already been working to change Major League Baseball's antitrust exemption to force the bigger teams to share revenue with smaller teams. This would have helped teams like the Mariners be more financially stable by guaranteeing income from big market teams like the Yankees and the Red Sox. Only 15 years after helping to get the Mariners in Seattle, Gorton was now faced with the prospect of the team leaving. Gorton was a member of the Senate Commerce Committee. He had worked with the Nintendo gaming company to prevent counterfeiting of their games, and Nintendo's North American headquarters were in Redmond, Washington. Gorton reached out to Minoru Arakawa and Howard Lincoln, the heads of Nintendo's North American division, for help. Arakawa put Gorton in touch with Hiroshi Yamauchi, the CEO of Nintendo. Yamauchi had helped expand Nintendo into the world's biggest gaming company, helped by the success of Nintendo in the United States. Gorton made a phone call to Yamauchi about possibly backing the deal to buy the Mariners, and Yamauchi said he would personally finance the $100 million needed to keep the Mariners in Seattle. But there was a major problem. The other owners voted to disallow non-Americans from owning baseball teams. Even when Nintendo offered to take a minority share of ownership, the other owners still balked at giving any control to a foreign corporation. This also exacerbated an ongoing trade conflict between the US and Japan. But 6 months later, the owners reversed their decision based on a new compromise. Nintendo would be a minority owner of the team, but the operations of the franchise would have to be handled by an American resident of Seattle. Former head of Puget Sound Power and Light Company, John Ellis, was chosen from among the group that would own the majority stake in the Mariners, and this would keep the team in American hands but guarantee long-term financial stability. Senator Gorton had been at the center of brokering the deal. He had called on his friends and allies in the business community, as well as his connections in the federal government. The Seattle Times remarked that Senator Gorton had built a, quote, public-private, bipartisan, cross-jurisdictional, international coalition that made it happen and started the thaw in U.S.-Japan relations," unquote. You can tell that he was a central figure in the deal. Nintendo maintained a significant presence through 2016, when the company sold most of its shares to First Avenue Entertainment. But the Nintendo Mariners connection fostered an international relationship that helped encourage Japanese-born players to come to the U.S. The Mariners have had some of the most successful Japanese players, including Kazuhiro Sasaki, Hisashi Iwakuma, and former MVP and Rookie of the Year Ichiro Suzuki. Senator Gorton's work with the Mariners earned him his own bobblehead. I think that's something we can all aspire to. Senator Gorton has stated on several occasions that keeping Major League Baseball in Seattle was one of his most important career achievements. When asked about making tough decisions, Senator Gorton said that one of the most interesting and consequential decisions he ever had to make was to sue the American League. And this has had far-reaching impacts on Seattle's popular culture. For example, Seattle icons and Hall of Famers Ken Griffey Jr., Randy Johnson, Class of 2019 inductee Edgar Martinez, and future Hall of Famer Ichiro have all called Seattle home. Also, the Mariners are a source of regional pride for so many people in the Pacific Northwest. Senator Gorton has also been honored by the Mariners organization. He threw out the ceremonial first pitches in 1993, the year after helping keep the Mariners in Seattle, on opening day in 2001, and 2017, the 40th anniversary of the Mariners' inaugural season. Senator Gorton would make an excellent utility infielder during our rebuild. And that is the story of how Slade Gorton helped save professional baseball in Seattle twice.